Hey everyone, welcome back to Karenology. This story will have you shaking your head in disbelief. The first time Karen called the cops on me, I thought it was a joke. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, the sun was up, and I had just started mowing my front lawn. My job keeps me busy during the week, and weekends are the only time I can take care of my yard. Apparently, that was a crime in Karen's world. 15 minutes in, a squad car pulled up in front of my house. I turned off my mower, wiping the sweat off my forehead as an officer stepped out, looking almost embarrassed to be there. "Sir, we got a noise complaint?" he said, glancing at his notepad. "From your neighbor, Karen." I looked across the street, and there she was. Blonde bob, floral blouse, arms crossed, smirking like she had just won the neighborhood lottery. "You're kidding, right?" I said, gesturing at the dozens of other homes in our quiet suburban community. "It's a lawn mower. People mow their lawns." The officer sighed. "Look, there's no actual law against mowing your lawn at this hour, but your homeowner association has a noise regulation until 9 a.m. They've asked us to remind you." That's when I knew this wasn't just Karen being petty. This was a coordinated attack. I had dealt with homeowner association nonsense before, but this was new. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "But tell me, if there's no law, what exactly are you enforcing?" The officer hesitated. He knew this was ridiculous. "Just try to keep it down," he muttered before getting back in his car. As soon as he left, Karen strolled over, radiating fake concern. "Oh dear, I do hope this won't be a recurring problem," she chirped. "Some of us enjoy our peaceful mornings." I clenched my jaw. "You could have just asked me yourself, Karen," she gasped, like I had just slapped her. "I pay homeowner association dues, and I expect the rules to be followed." She sniffed before spinning on her heel and marching back to her house. That was the beginning. The next day, I received an official warning from the Homeowner Association. Apparently, I had been verbally aggressive toward Karen, and any further infractions would result in fines. That's when I realized she wasn't acting alone. She had the Homeowner Association wrapped around her finger. I did some digging and found out Karen was best friends with Bob, the Homeowner Association president. A smug 60-year-old retiree who acted like he owned the entire neighborhood. Things escalated fast. A week later, I got another notice. My front lawn was not up to homeowner association aesthetic standards. The kicker? It was because of a single patch of slightly taller grass near the driveway. They gave me 48 hours to fix it or face a fine. It was obvious this wasn't about lawn care. This was about control. I mowed the entire yard that evening, just to be safe. The next morning, my trash was still sitting on the curb, uncollected. I called the waste management company, and they said my pickup had been delayed due to non-payment. Which was interesting, considering I had auto pay set up. I pulled up my records. Payments were fine. Someone had called them and canceled my service. That same afternoon, I found a bright red violation notice taped to my front door. "Excessive debris left on property. $250 fine." I stood there, staring at the notice, feeling my blood pressure rise. This wasn't just homeowner association being annoying. This was deliberate. I checked with a few neighbors, casually bringing up the trash pickup issue. Everyone else had their garbage collected on time. And that's when I noticed something else. Karen, sitting on her front porch, watching me. She wasn't even trying to hide it. That night, I installed cameras around my house. The footage from the first night was nothing special, just the usual suburban quiet. But the second night? That's when I saw it. Around 2 a.m., two figures in dark hoodies walked up to my driveway. One of them dumped a pile of trash bags onto my lawn. Then they snapped a photo, presumably for another violation notice. I rewound the footage. One of them turned slightly toward the camera. It was Bob. That's when I knew. I wasn't just dealing with homeowner association pettiness. This was personal. And I was about to turn the tables. That morning, I did something they weren't expecting. Instead of reacting, instead of confronting anyone, I stayed calm. I printed out still images from the security footage and tucked them into an envelope. Then I went door to door, visiting my neighbors, casually bringing up the Homeowner Association's recent behavior. Some were hesitant to talk, but a few admitted they'd had similar experiences. Mysterious fines, inexplicable rule changes, and even threats of foreclosure over trivial infractions. Karen, of course, noticed what I was doing. By the time I reached my fourth house, she was outside, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had just torched her rose bushes. "You're spreading rumors," she snapped. "I'll be reporting this." I gave her my most pleasant smile. "Great. While you're at it, let Bob know I have security footage of him illegally trespassing on my property." The color drained from her face. For the first time since this all started, she actually looked nervous. That's when I knew I had her. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A new email from the Homeowner Association. I already knew it wouldn't be good news. Final notice: multiple violations. Immediate compliance required. Failure to comply will result in further action. I sat up, rubbing my eyes as I scrolled through the email. They had attached photos. My trash bags mysteriously appearing overnight. My lawn, which they now claimed had patchy discoloration. And even a picture of me speaking with neighbors. According to the Homeowner Association, that last one was unauthorized solicitation. That was a new one. I clenched my jaw. They weren't just trying to fine me into submission, they were trying to break me. By the time I got outside, Karen was already waiting. She leaned against her porch railing, coffee mug in hand, watching me with a smug grin. "Oh dear, another violation? It must be so hard keeping up with the rules." I ignored her, walking straight to my mailbox. Inside was a physical copy of the same email. Only this time, a handwritten note was attached. "Drop the complaints, or it gets worse." I took a deep breath. If they thought intimidation would work, they had underestimated the wrong person. Instead of reacting, I went back inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, and called my lawyer. I had met Sarah years ago when she helped a friend deal with an homeowner association nightmare, and I had a feeling I was going to need her expertise. "Do they have any legal grounds for this?" I asked after explaining everything. She sighed. "They're testing you. Homeowner association boards thrive on people folding under pressure. They throw around vague language, slap on made-up violations, and hope you either pay up or leave. But they made a mistake. If they falsified anything or selectively enforced rules against you, you've got leverage." That was all I needed to hear. I spent the next few days documenting everything. I printed out their emails, kept copies of the violation notices, and compiled footage from my security cameras. I even made a spreadsheet tracking their violations against me versus those of my neighbors. And then, things got worse. Late one night, I was reviewing footage when I noticed something unusual. Around 3 a.m., a car pulled up in front of my house. A figure stepped out, walked up my driveway, and poured something onto my lawn. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. They were killing my grass. I bolted outside with a flashlight, my heart pounding. The smell of chemicals hit me immediately, some kind of herbicide. My entire front lawn was drenched in it. I checked the footage again. The figure wasn't just some random vandal. The car they drove? It was Karen's. I stayed up the rest of the night, rage simmering beneath my skin. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. The next morning, I printed stills from the footage and drove to the police station. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow when I explained everything, but once I showed him the footage, his demeanor shifted. "This is trespassing and property damage," he said, jotting down notes. "We'll send someone over to take a statement." As I left the station, I spotted a familiar figure sitting in a car parked nearby. Bob, the Homeowner Association president. He was watching me. He knew, and he wasn't happy. That evening, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You should have let it go. I gripped the note tightly. This wasn't just about noise complaints or minor fines anymore. This was personal, and if they wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready. But the next morning, things took an even darker turn. When I stepped outside, my tires had been slashed. Deep, precise cuts. Not just one tire, all four. Whoever did this wasn't just sending a message. They wanted me stranded. I went back inside and pulled up my security footage, my hands shaking with anger. The footage showed two figures in hoodies, moving fast, working efficiently. One of them was shorter, stockier, the other tall and thin. The shorter one bent down and jabbed something into my tires before moving on to the next. The taller one kept watch. Then, just as quickly as they had come, they disappeared into the night. I rewound the footage, pausing on the moment the taller figure glanced up. A sliver of his face caught the light. Bob, I exhaled slowly. They had officially escalated this into criminal territory. I called Sarah again, keeping my voice steady. We've moved past intimidation. They slashed my tires. There was a beat of silence. Then she said, "Okay, now we play hardball." I sat in my kitchen, staring at the footage on my laptop. The images burned into my mind. Bob, the head of the Homeowner Association, the man who had been pretending to be a respectable member of the community. He was one of the people who slashed my tires in the dead of night. The implications of what I was up against settled in like a heavy weight on my chest. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "They slashed my tires," I said, my voice tight with restrained fury. "And I have proof. Bob was one of them." There was a long pause. Then Sarah's voice came through, sharp and decisive. "All right, we take this to the next level. No more waiting. No more playing nice." She instructed me to send her all the footage, every email, every violation notice. We were going to build an airtight case, and she was going to hit them with everything she had. But I had a sinking feeling that Bob and Karen weren't done yet. That suspicion was confirmed the very next morning. I woke up to a loud bang outside. My heart leapt as I threw on some clothes and ran to the front door. My mailbox had been ripped off its post and thrown halfway across the lawn. My security cameras caught the whole thing. Two men in hoodies, their faces hidden, one of them wielding a crowbar. They worked fast, just like the tire slashers. A second later, my phone buzzed with a new email from the Homeowner Association. Mailbox out of compliance with community aesthetic standards. Fine, $500. I let out a bitter laugh. This wasn't just about harassment anymore. This was calculated. I printed the email and added it to my growing pile of evidence. Then I took photos of the damage, the scattered remains of my mailbox, the fresh tire marks leading away from my property. This wasn't just intimidation. It was full-on retaliation. That afternoon, I received another visit. This time, it wasn't just a cop responding to a noise complaint. It was two uniformed officers, standing at my door with a serious look in their eyes. "Mr. Carter, we've received multiple reports of aggressive behavior and threats made against members of the Homeowner Association," one of them said, glancing at his notepad. "Your name was mentioned in several complaints." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you serious?" The officer didn't flinch. "We're just here to follow up. Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. This was a setup. I knew it. Karen and Bob were trying to paint me as the aggressor, flipping the narrative before I could strike back. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But first, I have something you should see." I led them inside and pulled up my laptop, showing them the footage of my slashed tires, the mailbox destruction, the security footage of Bob sneaking onto my property. The officers exchanged a glance. "We'll need copies of these," one of them finally said. "And we'll be speaking with the Homeowner Association as well." I nodded, but I wasn't holding my breath. I had seen this before. Corruption ran deep in small communities, and the Homeowner Association had influence. If I wanted to win this, I needed more than just the cops. I needed the entire neighborhood on my side. That night, I made a decision. I printed out flyers with stills from my security footage, detailing the harassment, the vandalism, and the false fines. I walked door to door, slipping them under mailboxes. The response was immediate. By the next morning, I had 6 neighbors knocking on my door, all with their own horror stories. They had been fined for nonsense violations, threatened with foreclosure, even had their own property vandalized. But until now, they had been too afraid to speak up. Karen had run this homeowner association like a personal fiefdom for years, and Bob had made sure to keep the financial gears turning. But now, their house of cards was starting to shake. That same afternoon, I was on my way back from the store when I noticed a black SUV parked down the street. It was idling, engine running, but the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. As I got closer, the car sped off. Something wasn't right. Someone was watching me. At noon, I got another email from the Homeowner Association. Cease all defamatory communication regarding the Homeowner Association. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I smiled as I hit reply. I attached my footage, my documented violations, my police report, and I CC'd every single resident in the neighborhood. As soon as I hit send, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with just 3 words written in bold black ink. "This isn't over." A chill ran down my spine. They were scared, but they weren't backing down, and neither was I. I held the note in my hands, reading the bold black ink over and over again. "This isn't over." The words felt like a threat, a final warning before they escalated again. I wasn't afraid, but I knew I had to be smart. They were getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. I stepped back inside and locked the door, my mind racing. I had enough evidence to expose the Homeowner Association's corruption, but they weren't backing down. Bob and Karen had too much at stake. They weren't just fining people for nonsense violations. They were running an entire operation designed to push homeowners out and seize properties for their own gain. Sarah called me that evening. "I don't like this," she said. "You need to be careful. These people are cornered, and when people like that feel threatened, they do stupid things." I rubbed my temples. "Yeah, I got a little reminder of that today. Someone left a note on my door." "A threat?" "Pretty much, just 3 words, but I got the message." She exhaled sharply. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I've been compiling everything. Your footage, your fines, the reports from your neighbors. We're filing a formal complaint with the state. This isn't just homeowner association harassment anymore. This is fraud, intimidation, and possibly racketeering." I felt a flicker of hope. That's what I needed to hear. But the fight wasn't over yet. That night, I barely slept, checking my cameras every hour. At 2:47 a.m., the black SUV returned. It stopped in front of my house, engine running. I could barely make out the figures inside, but I knew they were watching me, testing me. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it peeled away into the darkness. I took a deep breath and sent the footage to Sarah. They're watching me. Again. By morning, things had escalated even further. My front lawn had been vandalized. Spray paint across the grass, large black letters spelling out "Leave." It was bold, sloppy, and desperate. They wanted me to feel unsafe. But I wasn't going anywhere. I spent the next few hours knocking on doors, gathering more signatures for the complaint Sarah was preparing. More and more neighbors were coming forward now, emboldened by the fact that someone was finally fighting back. One elderly couple told me they had nearly lost their home to bogus homeowner association fines. Another family revealed that their mortgage payments had mysteriously been misapplied after they fought back against an illegal fee. The more I dug, the deeper the rot went. But Bob and Karen weren't done yet. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, 2 officers knocked on my door. Again. "Mr. Carter, we've received another complaint. Apparently, someone from the Homeowner Association is claiming you made verbal threats." I almost laughed. "And I assume there's no actual evidence of this?" One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. "Look, off the record, we're getting a lot of these calls lately, all from the same few people. It's starting to look like harassment, but we still have to document everything." I appreciated his honesty. "You want evidence? Come inside." I showed them the footage. The slashed tires, the mailbox destruction, the black SUV, the spray paint on my lawn. They watched in silence, exchanging glances. "Yeah, this is looking like more than a neighbor dispute," one of them finally said. "We're going to escalate this. I suggest you get a formal restraining order against Bob and Karen." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. That night, Sarah filed the first of many legal actions against the Homeowner Association. A restraining order against Bob and Karen, a fraud complaint, and a formal request for an independent audit of the Homeowner Association's finances. The walls were closing in, and they knew it. But the final blow was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens. Multiple police cars were parked outside Bob's house. Officers were leading him away in handcuffs, his face pale and tight. I stepped onto my porch, watching as Karen stood frozen on her lawn, her phone clutched in her hands, her mouth slightly open in shock. She knew what this meant. The game was over, or so I thought. I walked back inside, exhaling in relief. But as I reached for my phone, a text popped up from an unknown number. "You think this ends here? Think again?" My stomach tightened. This wasn't over yet. The text message sat on my screen, the words burning into my mind. "You think this ends here? Think again." A nameless threat. But I didn't need a name to know who it was from. Bob was in handcuffs, but that didn't mean the game was over. Karen was still out there, and if she had lost control before, now she was truly unpredictable. I exhaled, locking my door behind me. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't naive either. The Homeowner Association had been running unchecked for years, manipulating homeowners, stealing from them, terrorizing them into submission. Bob's arrest was just the beginning, and they knew it. Sarah called within minutes of the news breaking. "We're getting reports from other homeowners. People who were too afraid to come forward before are speaking up now. The state is already looking into the Homeowner Association's financials, and let's just say it's not looking good for them." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Finally. But I have a feeling this isn't over. I was right. By the next morning, I woke up to the sound of a police officer knocking on my door. Officer Ramirez, one of the few local cops I actually trusted, stood there with a grim expression. "We got a call about a break-in at your house," he said. "Are you okay?" I blinked, glancing behind me. Everything looked normal. No broken windows, no open doors. "What? No one broke in?" That's what I figured. "But we got a report. An anonymous tip saying there was suspicious activity at your address. Sound familiar?" I clenched my jaw. Karen. She was still trying to frame me, still grasping at straws. I pulled up my security footage, and sure enough, at 3 a.m., a car had pulled up in front of my house. Someone had gotten out, stood in my yard for a few seconds, then left. Just long enough to make it look like something had happened. Ramirez sighed. "This is getting ridiculous." "Tell me about it," I muttered. "What can I do?" "For now, keep your cameras rolling and don't take the bait. We're keeping an eye on her, but she's getting sloppy. If she steps out of line, we'll be ready." The problem was Karen wasn't just sloppy, she was desperate. That night, the black SUV returned. This time, they didn't just park. They threw something onto my lawn. A thick envelope. I waited until they drove off before I picked it up, my pulse pounding. Inside were copies of fake violations, forged complaints against me from people I'd never even met, and a single handwritten note. Drop everything or it gets worse. I smiled. They were out of moves. They had no power left except fear, and fear only worked on people who had something to lose. I called Sarah. Let's finish this. By the next morning, the neighborhood was in full rebellion. Sarah had filed formal complaints, not just at the state level, but at the federal level. The Homeowner Association's financial records were under intense scrutiny, and the evidence of fraud was piling up fast. And then the final blow came. Bob's arrest had started a domino effect. More board members were resigning, trying to cut deals before it was too late. The Homeowner Association's bank accounts were frozen. Fines were overturned. Homeowners who had been victims of their scam were lawyering up. And Karen? She had vanished. For days, no one saw her. Her house sat dark, her car gone, until one morning when a moving truck pulled up to her driveway. She wasn't home. No goodbyes, just gone. I stood on my porch, watching as the last remnants of her control over the neighborhood were loaded into a truck and driven away. Sarah called later that evening. It's done. The Homeowner Association is finished. They're dissolving it completely. Any remaining funds will be used to reimburse homeowners who were scammed. You did it. I let out a long breath. We did it. There was a long silence before she said, You know they're going to write stories about this case, right? Homeowner takes down corrupt homeowner association. Sounds like a movie. I chuckled. Yeah, well, let's just hope there's no sequel. And with that, it was over. No more harassment, no more threats, just peace. But as I locked my door that night, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. You may have won, but some of us don't forget. I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around the phone. A warning? A final scare tactic? Maybe, but I wasn't afraid, because this time they knew exactly what they were up against.